Welcome to another episode of Athens and Jerusalem. Let's begin where we can't escape. Let's begin with Logos.
Now, I would say that this openness, this being in the world, this referring to the world, to objects in the world, what I would like to call self-transcendence, this is disappearing as soon as you project a human being into a lower dimension than its own dimension.
Point of the V goes up to the nuclear explosion that created it.
Tell me this, Dr. Oppenheimer. Do you ever become frightened at what you're finding out here in this area that can't be measured in either time or space?
You see, that's a real point.
Do not be afraid. Open your hearts, open up your hearts.
Open up your hearts to Athens and Jerusalem, the infants of our culture, united, independent, polarized, and even bloody. Athens, the cradle of wisdom and rationality. Jerusalem, the cradle of faith and spirituality. In this podcast, we look at reunion. Could reason be more than modern secular skepticism? And could spirituality be more than belief? So welcome to another episode of the Athens and Jerusalem podcast. In this episode, we are discussing the questions: can AI give humanity a common religion? And based on that question, Cameron, maybe we can even discuss, do we need a common religion? Yeah, because I know that you think that we need a common religion for the possibility of like a common ethical or humanity in the world as we understand it today, with more or less like clash of civilizations going on. It's of course it's a very important question to raise. So, who want to start? Is AI something that could really help us to bring a common religion into reality?
I mean, I'll jump in and just say no. for two reasons. One, I think, like a really solid reason, and one less a solid reason. I mean, the first reason, which I think ultimately is less solid, would be that AI can give us great insights. It can help us map one thought system onto another thought system, one religion onto another religion. In that sense, it can be very helpful in giving us a sense of common ground between us, by acting as a kind of a translator between cultures. So there's hope there. But can it actually deliver to us that sense of the sacred, the sense of the transcendent that we think is an essential part of what a religion is? It's not just a set of doctrines. It's not just a set of do's and don'ts. It's not just a sacred history, but it's something that connects us to the thing that we take to be most meaningful. And is AI ever going to do that for us? And the second reason I would say no is because it's a question of authority. I mean, religion also has behind it, if one is going to change one's behavior because of a set of religious beliefs, then where's the juice behind that? You know, what's the implied reward or punishment behind taking a certain set of actions versus another set of actions? You know, could AI, because it's a human engineered thing and everybody knows it, however amazing the AI is, and maybe it manages through words, because it's really great at words, to inspire us and to take us to some transcendent place. So maybe it solves that first problem. Maybe I'm not being optimistic enough about AI. Maybe you can say, hey, generate me a new Bible, generate me a new Quran or something, and it actually, you know, generates something which is every bit as inspiring, if not more, and avoids all the difficult bits. And so, wow, we have the transcendence piece, but we know that it's human engineered, so why would we do what it's asking us to do? Why would we give up our own self-interest for the sake of someone else's interest if there wasn't some sort of transcendent authority behind it, usually associated with some sort of system of rewards and punishments? And I don't see how AI could ever do that, however powerful it gets, because in the end, we know that it's something that we created, not something that was created by God.
One of your claims that we know that it is human, created by human. I'm not really sure that normal or mainstream people actually know this when they're using it. I'll give an example. I had a student that was, I gave the student a task, and he failed this task like completely, and it was a very simple task that he was like trying to explain the difference between what, why, and how. But he didn't manage this. And then I asked him, what kind of sources have you used to do this? And he was like, what? Was I supposed to have sources? And then I thought, okay, does that mean that you have tried to do this by your own mind? Like just, no. This was not the problem. So of course I understood that he was using AI. And then I was wondering, but if you use AI, isn't AI a source? And he doesn't understand AI as a source. He understands AI as the truth. And why do young people do this? Because they are like, in the Norwegian system, they are like trained in critical thinking towards sources. But when it comes to AI, there's no like this. And in this situation, because it was about didactics, and the answer was, you have to prompt it very well if it should actually give you the right answer. Still, I don't believe that AI can give any right answers. But anyway, that's a different question. But anyway, I think this is like an example of how young people today are actually using AI. And then I'm wondering, could AI be like really an authority, a different kind of authority that we have never seen before? Because they believe that they are actually synthesizing, which means maybe AI is the new religion.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, to see AI in a way as a man-made God. But I think there's, in what Stephen was saying, it just reminded me of something analogous. I'm trying to think when this happened, but it was sometime early 90s. I'm sure that you both remember the famous Soviet dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn that was finally sort of expelled from the Soviet Union, and he ended up in America. And I think after 1 year in America, he gave a talk at Princeton University, and one of the points, maybe one of the central points that he raised in his talk, and I'm of course, paraphrasing, he said that having lived all his life in the Soviet Union, he knew what the pitfalls of the Soviet and the communist thinking were. But he said that he had never understood what the pitfalls of Western thinking were until he came to America. And he said that after 1 year in America, he has realized that Westerners believe that morality can be replaced by legislation. So if you have good laws, that will make people moral and make society moral. And this was the first time, because he wasn't, as far as I know, at all a religious person, but he referred to God and said that in the past, people would do moral things because they believed this was the will of God. And this was the sort of the motivating power for their moral behavior. But now that people have discarded a belief in divinity, then there is no such sort of imperative. And he said that legislation alone is not going to make people moral. And I think this is very much a similar kind of point as I understood Stephen raising about AI. And I think this sort of really goes also to the essence of our theme, bringing Athens and Jerusalem together, that following the truth or doing the right thing is not just an rational thing. There is another element to it. And there's also, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is not really analogous, but there is this Persian, very well-known Persian medieval poet called Sa'di. And he has a poem in which, and again, of course, I'm paraphrasing and translating. He says that people ask a question, which one is the right path, the path of love or the path of reason? And he says that this is a wrong question because there is only one path, and that is the path of love. But reason is the light that illumines that path. And I think that if we don't have that element of love, then reason alone is not going to be a path for us or a way for us.
So if I understand you correctly, you would say that it doesn't help to say that AI could give us like reasons because they can't give us love. But wouldn't we say that in whatever book or text you are giving into a religious mindset, there will always be something that is have to be based on the human inner soul or something, and this is the love part.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is more than is do AI, because we can't say that AI will give us the love part, but could AI give us like a reasoning in a way that is common for all human beings?
Mm-hmm.
In a way, it seems to me that this conversation is like is recapitulating in a kind of microcosm the whole crisis of the modern age. That and this is kind of recency bias, but I recently read a encyclopedia article summing up the thought of Nietzsche, and Nietzsche was, I think, circling around the same problem, but the 19th century version of the problem, which was what is morality based on? And he understood morality to be, in the West, Christian morality in the West, to be based on a certain idea about God, a certain idea about how God acts in the world, and so on and so forth. Ideas which he took to have been, disproven by modern science. And in the light of that, what do we do with morality once the foundation of morality has been pulled out? And if that foundation of morality is a certain way of thinking about God, and that's no longer viable for the modern mind, then we're left kind of hanging in the air. We're left with a kind of, edifice of morality, edifice of do's and don'ts, which may last and persist kind of on its own inertia, maybe for a few generations. But since the foundation has been pulled out, it's only a matter of time before the whole thing disintegrates. And one way to put his philosophy is it was a quest to ask, well, what comes next? What comes next given this event, which he calls the death of God? And what replaces it? And are we going to replace it with reason? Is that a viable way forward to sort of work out, okay, we don't have rules given to us by an external agency, so we've got to find out through the operation of reason what we're going to do, how we're going to live, how we're going to treat other people. Is that going to be sufficient? And I think his answer to that was no. Is asking if AI is sort of going to be the next religion, is that kind of a variation on that theme. It's saying, well, there's some reasonable entity that we can base our ethics on. There's some, power to which we can kind of cede a bit of our own, I guess, independence, and say, well, the AI is going to get it right because it's smarter than us, and it's compiled the sum total of human knowledge and understanding about these things, and so we can trust that it's that whatever it says about right and wrong is something that we can follow. But then we're back to the problem, which I started with, which is in the back of our mind, we're always going to know that this is our creation, even if we take it for granted, even if we no longer question whether it's right or wrong, even if as whatever the students don't even think about it as a source, they just think about it as a source of truth. Even if that's all the case, this is still something we created. So how is it fundamentally going to motivate us to change our behavior? And because if it doesn't do that, it's just a philosophy.
Yeah, and I just was reminded of something which was developed long before AI was even discussed back in the 70s. I remember the United Nations came up with this because one of the obvious ethical and social wrongs of today is the huge economic disparity between nations and within nations, right? And I don't think we need very high intelligence of any kind to realize that this is both practically detrimental and definitely morally so. So, and of course, people have been looking for solutions. So back in the 70s, I remember the United Nations came up with this thing called, it was a document called A New Global Economic Order. It was a practical plan about how we could sort of rectify these discrepancies and these injustices, and how the rich nations could gradually help the poor nations sort of get off their loans and so forth, and create a balanced and just economic system. Well, you probably have never heard of this because this thing was sort of, it was discarded before it was ever, implemented, even into the least degree anywhere. And this reminds me of when I was also a young man. I once happened to participate at an international conference, and one of the speakers there was then the Director General of UNESCO, a wonderful, humble man, as great men are. And I was a young PhD student then, and somehow we ended up taking the same taxi from the conference to the airport. And he said to me, he said, if you would ever come to my office in Paris, I could show you that in my drawers, I've got solutions to just about every problem in the world. He said, we don't lack solutions. We lack the will to put them into practice. So I think that we often have this wrong idea that what we are missing or lacking is like the right rational model of how to put things right. But that is really not the case. What we are lacking is that inner drive to actually do something that is ethical, if it's not something that immediately addresses our own personal needs, wants. So I think somehow I am very skeptical about any kind of intelligence alone being able to, create a better world or happier human beings, if that element of love in the deepest sense of the word, or dedication to something higher than our practical and utilitarian needs does not exist.
What will give us that motivation? If not reasoning through things and figuring out in a kind of utilitarian sense what we ought to do, then what is the source? I mean, we're back to the question that that Nietzsche was asking. If if belief in God as a source of this motivation, as the source of morality and everything else, is no longer an option for the modern mind, partly because of the success of science, um, uh, and the seeming causal closure of the universe, that we don't need supernatural forces and agencies to understand the world around us. So the way we used to think about what God's job was in the world, what the job of spirit was in the world, doesn't seem to have a job anymore, because we understand the world through these physical means. If that's no longer an option for the modern mind, and that's a premise, then what is going to be the source going forward? Somehow I have to recover God. It was discarded for the wrong reasons, and we need to pick it back up again and carry it forward into the future, and that's going to give us this ground of morality that seems to have been pulled away from us. Or do we have to go forward with a kind of rebirth of the sacred, divine, in some other form, because the old form is no longer going to fit the modern mindset? And if that's the case, then what is that form going to take? Can we still think of God as a being? I was just listening to a lovely YouTube video by Marcus Borg, who was talking about his personal journey as a Christian growing up and in his young adulthood, fundamentally thinking about God as a being who's the source of light and life and the rules and morality and everything else, and then transitioning, in his later adulthood, to an idea, well, maybe God is not a being, but something more like the ground of being, something in which we live and move and have our being, but is not a being separate from other beings, which solves certain problems, philosophical problems, maybe generates other challenges, but is that the direction the world needs to go, to sort of find a new common understanding of the divine, which then gives us or restores to us this ground of common action of moral behavior and so forth that the world seems to lack? Or is that too optimistic? Is it too optimistic to imagine that humanity is ever going to unite around one particular conception of a metaphysical or spiritual idea, given the immense diversity of the human experience, the diversity of minds that isn't going away, nor would we want it to go away?
So maybe based on this question you are raising, Stephen, maybe I should try to get back to like what was my starting point, and then maybe we could like try to could there be anything in this AI question? Mm-hmm. First of all, about Nietzsche and this, the development of human history and what direction we are going. Statistically, there is, I think there had never been that much peace in the world in the beginning of this millennium, which means that we have, if we compare it with earlier ages where religion was more part of the reality than the secular society, things seems to be better in secular societies, actually. This is also like, I'm not sure, but an example of Iran today, or it's not easy to say these kind of things, but it's something in this might be some statistically correct. And then we could say that maybe also AI. I think when we had this episode on AI and ethics, we showed that there are possibilities and there are future possibilities of using AI as a kind of prophet for your own action what should you do? And then if we, in a consequence ethical perspective, would see that what is best for you is also something that brings you to community. So then maybe, even though Cameron said that we have like the best, we have already know what the best reasoning for being is, then I still believe that maybe AI could be like a help or something that actually people believe in as an authority. And I'm trying to explain a little bit more about why do people understand AI as this authority? I think that the reason is that they believe that AI is actually a synthesis of every sources we have, which means this is the best answer we have for the moment in every question. And if this is the understanding that even though we know that it's created by human, we in a way we understand it as something superhuman in its existence. And this is also something we could understand when it comes to religious questions. I mean, to show like that what is common in all religion, what is the sense of all religion, and could like AI be helpful in this way to actually to overcome different perspectives in religion and bring religion together.
What you say almost sounds like AI is attractive to modern man because it's like God without the metaphysics. It's like having a computer-generated God. It's sort of more in line with our modern thinking, but it shows that we're still looking for, that we're attracted by the idea that there is some source that will give us the perfect knowledge, almost like unerring guidance. It's just that now we don't have to associate it with something metaphysical. So, and I think,
sorry.
Anyway, no, go ahead, please.
These AIs, as we know, are what the guidance they produce for us is a kind of averaged over a sum total of their training set. Why should we assume that the training set sort of that the majority of the training set embeds the right kind of morality? Let me try to make this more explicit. Suppose you go to your Oracle AI to answer a big life question. And the big life question basically can be boiled into, I have a choice to make, and choice A is going to benefit me personally. It's going to give me a bigger salary. It's going to give me whatever the thing that I wanted, but maybe at the expense of others. And choice B is not going to benefit me as much, but it's going to be a lot better for society. And you ask the AI, well, which path should I take? What's the AI going to tell you? Is what it's going to tell you going to be in part a feature of the prompts you've given it, because it always tries to reinforce the biases that you plug into it? And B, is it going to tell you something which is ultimately an outcome of all the training material that has been given? And since when has the majority of the human race been right about something? I mean, on the real big questions, are we basically saying ultimately, if we're going to trust AI as a kind of oracular, infallible, source of ethics, essentially that translates to saying that the majority of we essentially have faith that the majority of the training set is going to be aligned with what is best, whatever that means, which I'm skeptical of.
Me too, but maybe you're prompting the wrong question. maybe the question is, what should I believe in? What should I have faith in? What is actually like the purpose of my life?
I've never actually tried this. We probably should have tried this before. before talking about it. I'm curious now if I go to the leading the front models and sort of ask them all the same sets of questions, am I going to get similar answers from all of them?
Yeah, and I have no idea. And I also heard about this cannibalism, that they are, if you are prompting a question too many times, they are actually starting to generate their own answers. So in a way, it's looping itself, and it becomes more and more the same answer. But maybe this kind of cannibalism actually is good when it comes to these kind of questions, because then the answer is going to be the same answer for everyone if you just prompt it often enough.
Mhm.
I would like to raise a thought that I haven't really thought through at all, but just came to my mind that, like if we think of nature, right? I mean, and of course, we know about the theory of evolution, but that evolution has taken place within the limits and as it were dynamics set by certain primary, how to say, or essential forces in the universe that have been there from the beginning, right? So one could say that, at least in nature, good solutions are those that are in accordance with the dynamics and principles of those fundamental forces. So it would seem a bit weird to try to find some source of intelligence that could sort of tell you how you could, have some good ways of development in challenging those forces or sort of disregarding those forces. And I'm thinking that in the same way, I mean, are there some sort of given parameters for human happiness or human meaningfulness of human life, or even human ethics, that we need to just find out about and conform to, rather than having some sort of a, deus ex machina, the sort of a artificial god that is going to create solutions that we could have never thought about otherwise, that are not in conformity with anything we've known before. I don't know what the expectation really is.
I'm glad you mentioned evolution, because that was at the back of my mind in thinking about this question of universal morality. If we take the planet as kind of like a petri dish, and there's different cultural zones on this planet, which we can think of as like different colonies, bacterial colonies on that petri dish, which over the centuries have grown, and we can all imagine in our mind's eye, different bacterial colonies growing in a petri dish, until they start bumping into each other and into the edges of the petri dish. And at that point, something's going to happen. There's sort of how things were as these colonies were growing essentially unimpeded. And then there's the state after the boundaries start interfering, and as they reach the limit of the petri dish, there's going to be a die-off, and the most, I don't know, aggressive colony is going to win. This is the law of evolution, that fundamentally in a world of limited resources, there is a competition, there's a life or death competition, and in the end, the organism that's best suited to grab those resources is going to win. So is that the case with humanity? Is that how we ought to see humanity? Is that sort of the embedded assumptions of an AI model that assumes that ultimately organisms are separate from each other and in a fundamental state of competition? Organisms, and now I'm talking about human beings. Or is the training set starting from a different assumption, that human beings are fundamentally in a state of cooperation and that's the source of our strength and the source of our progress and so forth. Is it cooperation or competition? I mean, I'm putting it forward as a binary. Obviously, it's both and not either or. But it's important, I think, in thinking about what would an artificial intelligence sort of guide us in the direction of, given that what set of assumptions you start with about the nature of humanity and is it cooperation or competition is going to be incredibly important in the sorts of answers and the sorts of guidance you would get out of such a system. And that's where I would assume that it seems more likely to me that the model of competition is more likely to be the model that would inform its guidance, is because competition is I don't know, it seems to be a more pervasive theme in and the sort of assumption of separateness is, I think, a far more common and pervasive theme in the sort of content that humanity's been generating over the last millennia that goes in as the training data for the AI. So it kind of reinforces itself. You know, we've started with this assumption of competition, and we'll continue in that vein. Given this incredible tool that humanity has now developed, it's going to reinforce and sharpen that instinct, that instinct about the universe, that this is a matter of competition. Cultures are in competition with each other, and it's becoming a kind of a life or death. It's an existential question now for the human race. You know, the East and the West, are they fundamentally at odds with each other, competing for limited resources? One of them is going to win, and one of them is going to be destroyed, or are we searching a new kind of paradigm for the human race in which what we have one single global culture that somehow is adopted, or that somehow we attain a kind of stability of multiple cultural zones that all represent different ways of human flourishing and different ways of thinking about the divine and different ways of thinking about governance and these other big questions. Is it possible for a stable configuration on this planet to exist, you know, into the centuries and millennia in the future, with this kind of patchwork diversity of cultures that we're seeing now? That, I think, is a huge question, and I think the AI, you know, if we sort of hand the answers over to AI, I worry that the answers we're going to get are going to be too informed by the previous ways of thinking, which have been dominated by the more tribalistic modes, the mode of human separateness and the mode of competition.
Yeah, I agree that. I think even at the very best, I'm very skeptical about AI being able to come up with, as it were, some insights and basic principles that are as yet unknown to humanity. But it may have a very pragmatic function that, you know, if because if you say, you know, God has said this, most people will say, okay, so what? But if you say the same thing, AI has said this, then they'll say, oh yeah, wow, let's do it. So if we can use AI to, you know, it's a bit like when your parents tell you something when you're a teenager, you say, oh, come on. But if your friend says the same thing, you go, oh, wow, well, that was a real piece of wisdom, wasn't it? So maybe AI is a good way to feed religious truth to people so that they don't get hung up on the fact that, you know, it's associated with this term God that they have some sort of an allergy towards. I don't know really, because I find it very difficult to imagine that AI would come up with some sort of ethical perspective or insight that no human being as yet has done. And I don't know really what that would be even based on. And as you said, Stephen, so well, that, I mean, you know, the danger is rather quite the opposite, that it will only consolidate our worst kind of limited ways of thinking.
What you're saying, Stephen, reminds me of Thomas Hobbes. You know, and this, even though most people would prefer to collaborate, as long as there are some people that would, you know, choose to compete, they will often like win over those who are collaborating. Even though history has shown many examples where collaboration has won over those few in competition. And even in civil society, we could see that collaboration is like what is giving human their the best way of acting, especially on a long term. So I'm not even sure that if you feed AI with all the information we have about competition and collaboration, no, I'm not sure what will be who will win. My experience in life is that there's a lot of very good intentions in what people are thinking and doing, most people. And then there is some really rotten apples in the bag, and unfortunately they are striving for power of in a way that is it's not good for human being, unfortunately. But for most people, that's also why I like the Norwegian Peace Prize is for me is something very problematic, that they are giving the Peace Prize to people that obviously is more interested in power and self-interest than in human interests.
Mm.
And still because they are like some kind of good intention or something, then they're giving it.
Yeah, I would really like to go back to this thought that what we lack in the world are not solutions. It's not like we don't really know what it takes to make this world a much better place. I mean, some of those solutions are so obvious that, like any 7-year-old could figure it out. Overcoming things like, economic, social injustice or war or poverty or what, all of these things, all these millennial goals. They're so self-evident that they should be differently, and even what can make them be different. I think really the greatest challenge right now for humanity is what will be able to change the will of people so that we direct our willpower, that we direct and orient our actions in a different way than we're doing today. It's not that we don't know what is right, it's wanting to do what is right. And I don't think that AI is going to create that inner drive that we need. And I think that the longer we the longer we keep away from that kind of power that can transform human beings, that historically has shown the capacity to transform human beings' minds and wills. As long as we keep away from that, then we're just prolonging our misery. And we before we I think started this session, we were talking about some of the things that are happening in different parts of the world today. It's very sad. It's very tragic. But I mean, unfortunately, what is really the saddest is that all of them could have been averted. None of them had to be like that. The only reason we're suffering these things is because we have not responded to those sort of highest calls of humanity that have been sounded in the name of true religion, not religion made a weapon of power, but true religion.
Yeah, I agree. It's not so much a matter of not really knowing what to do, but lacking the willpower to do it. And in the context of religion, it's as though religion has lost its life force. It's still there in places and in individuals, but as like a cultural force, we're suffering this incredible, I think, disenchantment. And what is going to bring about a re-enchantment of the world? I've been listening to the soundtrack to Hades Town, and I think the ancient Greeks, as often they do, were onto the right questions, and sometimes onto the right answers. And in this case, it was the myth of Orpheus. And there's some just killer lines in Hadestown. You know, that what's Orpheus's job? You know, he's trying to find that song that will bring the world back into tune. You know, because it's fallen out of tune, and the world is going through a kind of a winter time. And in other ways, it's not. I mean, technologically, incredible things are happening in terms of, yes, the overall the amount of dire poverty in the world is decreasing. You can, read Steven Pinker and come away with a very rosy picture of things. At the same time, you can experience the actual world and feel that disenchantment and feel the kind of wintertime of the spirit. And, we need the Song of Orpheus. And who brings the Song of Orpheus but Orpheus? I mean, in that sense, we're kind of dependent. We can't just sort of sit around in the wintertime and say, well, we want spring to come again. What you need is the person to come and re-enchant. And I think in human history, that's what it requires, not a philosopher, but the prophet, the Orpheus figure who comes and re-enchants the world and gives us a sense of possibility, of what could be, who could see the world as it might be in spite of the way that it is now. And that vision can seem not just optimistic, but just airy-fairy out of this world, completely not in line with the reality of things. But when it re-enchants the world, it becomes that reality. When enough people are re-enchanted by that tune, the reality of things changes. What we think of as possible changes. But that's not something I think we can attain by powerful AI system or by the right sequence of logical arguments. There's music that has to be heard and produced.
I've heard AI music, and everything sounds similar. And then I was just wondering if we are ending up giving everything to AI, maybe we could end up in tuned but very boring. I don't know.
It's almost like the training set of AI is like points dropped in a complicated terrain. Think of like a contour map. And the AI data set is like also millions, trillions of points on a large surface that gives you a sense of where are the highs and the lows. And then when you ask the AI something, it's able to really, really well interpolate between the points, which are the data set, to accurately give you a sense of the lay of the land all across this map, which is its training set. But what it can't do is explore the terrain beyond the training set and give you a sense of, is there, and if we're looking for a peak, the peak human experience, and within this terrain that humanity has already explored, there's some peaks and there's some valleys, and they're really nicely mapped out by our AI systems, but there's terrain beyond which we haven't explored yet. They're like ways of thinking and being and boundaries of knowledge which we haven't yet crossed over into. And I'm not sure our AI models are built to explore that terrain. They're built to like interpolate it in the existing training set, which is not to say we won't find some technological marvel that this is AGI, I suppose, artificial general intelligence, that then is able to traverse beyond that boundary and find higher peaks and lower valleys, and lead us to the promised land, so to speak. But at this moment, I don't think it's there. It's not doing that. That's why the AI generated music sounds so bland, because it's kind of an average of the music it's been fed into. And there's much better music out there to be created. At this point, it still has to be created by a person.
There's no soul in it.
No soul.
Then we are back to the love. But actually, one thing I was thinking of was chess. Because in chess, the machines are actually able to know what could be outside the map as the next best move that has never been done before. And it's funny that when Dreyfus and Dreyfus was writing the Mind of a Machine book in the 80s, they said that this would never happen. But then it has happened. And Magnus Carlsen has just given up on trying to play against AI because he's losing all the time. It's impossible. What Cameron said earlier, and this is a very important point for me, is that when it comes to chess, if Magnus Carlsen would tell me what I should do, there would be no problem for me doing it. I would move the queen on the table or based on the machine, the computer. But this is so much more difficult when it comes to real life or it comes to real art, that maybe someone really good musicians could have told me exactly what I should have been playing. But I would not be able to do this because the difference between reasoning and action is so huge. There's so large difference between, and this is, of course, this is the problem that makes us do wrong things, but this is also the reason why we do art. And we do things that are exceptional to human beings. And as long as we are having and dreaming of having exceptional human beings, there will also be the possibility of wrongdoings. But if we just remove every possibility of exceptional action and giving everything into this reasoning machine or whatever we could call it, then maybe we could also reduce human being from doing wrong.
That would be the hope.
And
I'm not sure if I'm hoping it either. I would prefer to have both excellence and wrongdoings.
I think, in fact, the very essence of our perfection, paradoxically, is the fact that we can be wrong. Because if we were sort of programmed to only make right decisions, then we would be, in fact, sort of programmed machines rather than human beings. I think one of the essential prerequisites for love to exist is that there has to be freedom of choice and will. Because if somebody injects something into me that would make me love Knut Ove, that love would be totally worthless. And so I think we have to be careful that in our quest for the right answers, we don't lose something which is even more important, that is understanding those answers and wanting to put them into practice. I mean, AI could probably choose somebody, the most suitable life partner, but if there's not love between those two people, that correspondence of circumstances and qualities is not going to be of that much value.
Maybe some would say that it is possible to learn to love someone, but I'm sure that it's the opposite. It is actually possible to feel love between someone first.
Okay, well, we're back to Saudi. Love is the path, but we definitely need reason to illuminate it. And that's where Athens and Jerusalem meet in a beautiful way.
I think we should end there. It's a perfect ending. Thank you to Cameron for the words.
It was wonderful.
So thank you for listening to this episode of Athens and Jerusalem.
You have been listening to Athens and Jerusalem, created by Cameron Namdar, Stephen Phelps, and Knut Ove Essay. Nora Juel is the technical support. Music is pieces of Edvard Grieg's Morning Mood. The voices in the intro are Viktor Frankl, interview with Robert Oppenheimer and Pope John Paul II. Thank you for listening, and please check out another episode.